You are now listening to the White Student Transmission, a podcast dedicated to the needs of white students in every school and white peoples of every nation, providing resources, talking points, and having the important discussions that all white people should be having right now. Enjoy the show.
Welcome, and thank you for tuning in. I am your host, Dave, and today we are joined by the Double Drives.
Hi, guys.
Today we're reviewing a technique called social prosecution, and the left has taken the tactics and strategies that attorneys normally would use inside of the courtroom, and they have taken these attack techniques outside of the courtroom into general society, using them against us in a social setting to shock us or put us on trial for any random subject they can find or exploit. In turn, this creates splinter groups. Each group is taught to make a claim of injustice and tailor a prosecution-style verbal attack against the parent culture. This causes splinter groups to turn against and betray the host nation or parent culture that let them in. I'd like those of you listening to walk away knowing what's done to us in public is nothing more than premeditated attack strategies cooked up by Marxist agitators using the same highly effective techniques that attorneys use inside of courtrooms to bash people, incriminate them, and extort them. When you encounter these leftist public arguments, don't view them as something that they believe to be truthful. View it as an extortion technique or a frame job. They're just looking for an opportunity to put you on trial in a social setting and socially prosecute you to see what they can get from you. Let's talk about how the target nation is first paralyzed using special protection laws. Even though we're both in different countries, we both have this that was done to our countries first. Tell us a little bit about the laws by you.
All right, so I'm Brazilian. I guess I should get that out of the way right quick. In Brazil, what they did was they first did this, and they're trying to do this in the United States. They will make your free speech laws relative. What do I mean with relative? Well, everyone has the absolute right to free speech. That's one of the basic tenets of democratic freedom. When you make that relative, that means that sometimes your speech might offend someone. Sometimes your speech can cause what they call to be a social malady or perpetuate prejudice, which the Marxists, they use that word a lot, by the way, prejudice. And if you see anyone advocating hate speech laws because of the prejudice that is said, then you know they want to control free speech. Now, special protection laws. In my country's case, for instance, we have solid laws against what they call racism, in that you cannot refer to someone of another ethnicity than yours, even in abstract speech, as any way derogative. However, that is not equally prosecuted. Some groups have more protection from not being prosecuted criminally for this than others. So not just are you going to be socially considered a social pariah, you are going to be criminally prosecuted in Brazil. Mm-hmm. This is something that curtails speech very much. Now, I'm going to entertain you with a concept called control of language to explain why Marxists do this. Control of language is a way to defeat the opposing viewpoint by keeping said viewpoint without any means of defense. In other words, if a village is suffering regularly from attacks by wolves and the villagers are not allowed to say the word wolf for fear of punishment, then that village will have no means to defend or prepare itself against any further eventual wolf attacks and would die out as a result. So when you censor words for fear of offending another group or because they might cause duress, you're actually favoring criticism of a particular group versus all the others. And that is a way they control the language.
And, that's a good point, because I think even though we're in different countries, we kind of see that here in America, and we see that in other countries as well, where some people are allowed to be criticized, but not others. And it really, something that we're all noticing, that pattern. They achieve that through different angles. But think about this, when Marxists want to leverage different populations off of one another, and they're going to teach, first they install these laws where some people can be criticized, but if you criticize others, you get in trouble. And then they'll teach some groups to use these extortion arguments and these attack techniques, knowing that the host nation cannot use the same techniques to fight itself and to defend itself, right? So basically you have the host is now paralyzed, and there's these social arguments that are being laid against it. It's being charged with these crimes, and they'll get arrested or they'll get in trouble if they attempt to use counter arguments to defend themselves. So in this kind of a setting, by the public eye, the leftist or the group that makes these extortion arguments, they always enjoy that false victory in the public eye because no one can counter them. No one can argue back, or else if you argue back using the same style techniques, you get in trouble. And I think that we all kind of notice that pattern, whether you're in America, South America, Brazil, Europe, even in South Africa, we've seen this type of technique. But this kind of goes into when Marxists are prosecuting the parent culture, and this is even prosecuting the parent culture for crimes that are not even unique to that parent culture. It's just a means to put them on trial and make extortion demands. Now, you and I know, after looking at this, that by doing that publicly, it creates splinter groups. And what they do after they create these different categories is they begin recruiting to each of those groups to make them bigger and use them to leverage against the host population or the parent culture. Speak a little bit about what you notice in your area as far as Marxists using this in the splinter groups.
All right, so I'm going to be a little roundabout here because I have to explain things in a very thorough way, but you might notice that certain groups are given a lot of judicial airtime, you could say that. Some cases are being highlighted and others are being systematically erased from media presence. They use academia, they use media, they use several angles to highlight certain issues and to drown out others. I will give a good example, like some group was threatened, so to speak, by an economic development, and the media made a huge think about it. Social pressure would enable judicial activists to go to the actual stand and make a case that is not solid, and thanks to social pressure, they might actually get the verdict they want. They use this as a tool so they can both control public opinion, because when you put two groups into conflict, that's part of the dialectical approach of Marxism, and they're going to put these two groups in conflict, and they're going to make one of the groups to be the oppressor, in which case it might be the host culture and whatever the host culture develops, and they will make the other group the oppressed. And they will do this with several different groups of diverging interests, so they can attack that one monolithic group all at once. And they do this because they want to create a death by exhaustion kind of a situation. They want to make the other group so beat up, so tired, that they have no choice but to comply with the Marxist agenda.
Well, that's a good point, because it kind of seems like when they split up as many different groups as they can, and like you're talking about, they'll look for anything. They'll say, okay, can we use the religious angle? Yes. Can we use the angle of gender? Yes. Can we use the angle of ethnicity or race? Yes. And they multiply it, and they kind of set the host culture up, for death by 1,000 cuts, and to be killed off internally and to be destroyed. Because just like you said, after they create all of these groups and after they condition them to attack the host, they tell all of these groups, okay, everybody join together and let's all gang up on the parent culture and the host culture and let's destroy the country internally. Do you kind of see that happening where you're at?
Yes, actually, you see that a lot. Because of our racism laws and because the media is not allowed to actually say racist things about any group, they will use the social strata tactics. They know that the most economically active group is the middle class here, right? And the demographic of the middle class is from a now minority group, about 40% group. And they will use like, oh, this is such a middle class thing to do, or I hate the middle class, and they're going to give the people who say these things a lot of audience, and they're going to glorify ghetto culture to decrease that group, eliminate it altogether, and then create an attempt to obtain full Marxist control of the country. You see that a lot, actually. There is a TV station in Brazil to watch out for that called Global. And if you see what Global does on a daily basis, you will see that there's a lot of Marxist propaganda behind it all. And this is something everyone should be watching out for.
Well, it's intentional. And I think a lot of us are noticing these patterns.
Well, the thing is, these patterns in Brazil, there's the other angle, which is the academia angle. The elite colleges of Brazil are not private. Except for very expensive exceptions.
Right.
So these elite colleges are inevitably public funded, and Marxists tend to aggregate in a place where they can work minimally with little to no auditing, you could say that. You know, they will not answer to anything. And they will spew their propaganda in these places, especially in human sciences and social sciences majors.
That's actually a good point that you're bringing up, all the different channels that they use to achieve that. And just to kind of reiterate, if the agitator or the Marxist, if they've made their social goal to bash the parent culture or to bash the host culture, they will use media, they will use academia, they will use the evening news, they will use regular news articles, they will use any of these things because any of those can be turned into a hit piece against the target, right? And it's more about the volume that you besiege everyone in and the consistency, because what you're doing is you're actually just conditioning all of those populations to feel animosity and want to attack the parent culture.
Indeed, you can see that when they give negative airtime to a guy called Jair Bolsonaro. He's a right wing. He's probably the only right wing politician in Brazil. Incidentally, he's also the least corrupt. He doesn't come up in any corruption allegations at all. He said something to a congresswoman who's a Marxist of the feminine persuasion, and she called him a rapist because he was a military man during the dictatorship. And he said something to her that, while controversial, should not have resulted in as much furor by the media as it should have. And so they kept hammering him 24/7 with a lot of derogative hit pieces, and in an attempt to make him apologize. He never apologized. And that's one of the lessons, actually. They will stigmatize you. They will try to break down any argumentative defense they have, and they will want you to apologize, because by apologizing for something you did not do or did not mean to do, or maybe you did, but you should not apologize regardless, you have no defense. You just admit guilt.
Well, you admit guilt, and I think that's the actual strategy.
Yes, and then their viewpoint becomes predominant. And a word of advice to someone suffering social prosecution: do not apologize for your act. This is how they get you, first of all.
Well, it's all a strategy, and it's a trick. And I think that just to kind of reiterate that, and to make it more visible to people who are trying to get their head around this, is if you break it down to, let's say you have two attorneys that are going into a courtroom, and one of them is going to prosecute the person on the stand, before the attorneys go in, they do their homework, and the prosecutor is going to take the person that's on the stand, and they're going to look through their history for any dirt they can find on them. They're going to look through for any bad things that they can find on them, and they're going to use that against them when they prosecute them. even though, maybe the rest of the world was all doing the same thing that person on the stand was doing. It's not about that. It's not about if everyone else did it. It's about being able to prosecute them, right? And I think that when we see the Marxists said, aha, I can use what attorneys use, but I can use it against the people in general society. If they know that we had special protection laws that impair us and block us from speaking out, and if they know that they can use an attack technique like this that we can't respond to, then they also know that they can get a false win. They can advance and we can't, or the host nation cannot defend itself. So just to kind of reiterate, social prosecution is when the splinter groups put the host or parent culture on trial, prosecuting them in a social setting, the same way one would normally prosecute someone inside of a courtroom. And my message for students, look closely at how the literature or the lesson used inside of the classroom or on campus is structured. Is it truly a balanced teaching of the subject that's at hand, or has it been worded to be a hit piece that would put you on trial and socially prosecute you in front of everyone else? If it is, tell them. Don't expect us to sit through a social prosecution. The school is required to offer an alternative teacher and class that does not use this method or subject you to differential treatment. Is there anything you would like to throw out there, any advice for students or even young adults that are dealing with this in society right now?
I do. The best defense you can have is to remember that Marxists like to use emotional argumentation. That means that they want you to feel guilty and to admit guilt for something you may not have done. So a good defense is to be objective, factual. You can rely on multiple sources with different leanings and be very watchful for turns of phrase that are meant to be persuasive instead of informative. You will see that a lot in textbooks related to history, geography, and any other things that are not related to science, because science needs to be objective. And these things can help you fight back Marxist influence on your mind. It's a war for your mind. You have to always keep that in mind.
Yeah, definitely. I think today's going to open up a great discussion on the topic of social prosecution and really open up people's eyes that they're kind of being ambushed and don't even really know it. So again, I want to thank you for coming on today. We definitely have to have more discussions like this and help prepare our audience and our listeners.